All right, joining us now, Dr. Susan Roberts, political science professor at Davidson College. Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Obviously not the greatest terms, but let's first start with the legacy that Senator Graham leaves. Obviously, foreign policy, he was a big Trump supporter. What's the legacy of Senator Graham, Dr. Roberts?
Thank you. I think the biggest legacy is he was willing to, as they say, reach across the aisle on some issues, on some he wasn't. And I think the picture that's being painted of him as flip-flopping in his support for Donald Trump is a little bit unfair, because I think he is someone that was issue-oriented, ideologically oriented. But I think one thing to realize that he was a realist. And at one point he said, Trump is my president now. And maybe shrugged his shoulder and said that. But I think he became someone that was a leading figure in the Republican Party and the country as a whole. And he was consequential.
And Dr. Roberts, a lot of people, we don't run into this situation too often, right? So they're wondering what exactly happens next. As we know, Senator Graham was facing re-election in the midterms. So walk us through what will happen for this primary and then what this looks like for midterms.
Well, I think for the primary in South Carolina, a Republican is in all likelihood going to win that seat. But I think that there's been a lot of, as I think one outlet said, mourning has turned into M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. Mourning has turned into maneuvering. And I think that means that I don't know how quickly it turned into that, but who's going to get the primary? Nancy Mace is the most likely contender, but the real dynamic is, does McMaster appoint someone that wants the seat in 2026 or someone that's a placeholder? I think that's one question. And I think the other is the issues that Lindsey Graham stood for. And again, what he contributed to the ideology of the Republican Party, which is not simply Trump. How Republicans vote is not an indicator of their deeper kind of commitment to issues. I think they're being realistic, and they're also being a little bit strategic, as you talked about, in terms of the midterms and what that holds for them.
Dr. Roberts, again, it's unfortunate that, we have to talk about replacing Senator Graham so quickly after his passing, but that's the nature of politics, especially in a year when you have midterms here. And I want to ask you a little bit more about that, because you mentioned, does Governor McMaster appoint somebody just as a placeholder or somebody who could potentially run for it as well? We know that the gubernatorial primary just passed, and Pamela Abbott, who has worked closely with McMaster, could potentially be in the running for that. Would that be a way to kind of give a nod to somebody who McMaster knows and say, hey, here's a chance to go ahead and prove yourself while also potentially running for that spot?
Yes, I think that might be the safest bet for McMaster. As far as I know, Everett does not bring the paper trail that Nancy Mace does to service to the American people and to service in South Carolina. And not the American people, I just mean to politics. She was much more consequent, much more controversial. And I think that's a factor that McMaster has to consider, not in terms of who's going to win the race, but who's going to really fill the void that Lindsey Graham did.
And Dr. Roberts, of course, Congress, working hard in Washington. How does the Senate continue to operate until there's that interim role that is filled?
Well, I think, unfortunately, there's a coupling of McConnell's illness and absence with the death, unfortunate, untimely death of Senator Lindsey Graham. And I think what they have to do is think about what's coming before them. What are the issues, such as the SAVE Act? And Lindsey Graham was in favor of President Trump's moves to change voting access and whatever side of the aisle you want to sit on in terms of ability to access the ballot. And I think that and the turning point, the questions about Ukraine and these issues, the war, these are some things that are plaguing the Republicans right now. And that's really where you've got to look.
What do you make of the chances of somebody else, similar age range as Lindsey Graham, but failed to get another gubernatorial vote. What do you make of Ralph Norman's chances, Dr. Roberts? Would that be somebody, another supporter of Trump that obviously ran for governor, did not get that seat, could possibly be eyeing replacing Senator Graham? Do you think that Ralph Norman has a shot of taking that position?
As far as I know, and secondhand, I do not know Norman. He's not as, Lindsey Graham was not the fervent supporter, MAGA supporter that Norman is. And I think that's a difference. But I don't think that's the baggage is going to change. The Senate, members of the Senate, Republican members, just have to decide what will supporting the president / supporting MAGA have to do with my reelection chances in 2026. And before we leave, I want to point your listeners or viewers to 2 articles to understand Lindsey Graham.
Okay.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I think that to see his fire and brimstone and ideological kind of commitment, just go to the Kavanaugh hearings about Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. Lindsey Graham, I show it in my class that here's what committee hearings are about. Now, Kamala Harris was also very visible and very loud, but Lindsey Graham, it is an incredible thing to watch. Look at that, and then also look at, someone sent me a post by Meghan McCain about a tribute. She said, among other things, he's the kind of person that you wanted to be seated next to at a dinner party. He was fun, he was witty, he was charming. And I think that's kind of reminiscent of the old politicians that many people won't remember, and that is a long time ago, Sam Ervin of North Carolina and some other members from the South who could combine that clever combination of wit and charm and decency.
Yeah, Dr. Roberts, you hit on a couple notes that a lot of people are saying is just that kind of remembering him more for the person he was, obviously political opinions aside. So I think that's what needs to be remembered.
Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This is something that's evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. Don't go too far. I know that we will be speaking with you in the coming weeks.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.